So during my Williams Appelli video, I mentioned that Phantom Blood was Hidehiko Araki's more direct approach to Joseph Campbell's A Hero's Journey. The Hero's Journey itself is a narrative template created by Campbell to help structure stories. It was designed by thoroughly examining old Greek and Roman mythology, and it is used to help writers create engaging and interesting stories. Which is why Araki might have found himself sticking close to this formula, as he claimed in the Jojoniums for Part 1 that Part 1 was the part he used to help him develop his writing for all of JoJo. This mixed with his desire to create a character who he could use as the symbol of purity and dignity are what helped Jonathan and Phantom Blood become the legends that they are now.
Time is a social institution and not a physical reality. There is, in other words, no such thing as time in the natural world, the world of stars, waters and mountains and clouds and living organisms.
So the Hero's Journey is a cycle that has 2 segments, 4 thresholds, and a multitude of steps between each threshold. The cycle begins in a segment which Campbell calls the Ordinary World. Then you have the first step, which is also referred to as the Status Quo, which Phantom Blood establishes pretty well right away in both the manga and the anime. They do this by showing the realness of death in the universe, along with showing Jonathan as just a normal kid attempting to live the life of a noble man. This shows Jonathan to be special, because in this grim world, his outlook on life is what keeps him positive. Him being the hero of this journey is also strongly reinforced by him in his introduction jumping willingly into a fight he cannot win in order to protect the honor of someone he's never met. Then we reach Jonathan's initial call to adventure, which he refuses, just like most great heroes do. This call to adventure is him overcoming Dio Brando. Jonathan actually does appear to accept the call at first, as he does beat up Dio for Arena's honor, but during the off-screen time skip that happens between chapter 5 and 6 and episode 1 and 2, Jonathan and Dio have, at least on the surface, grown closer to each other as family. This is reinforced when Jonathan confronts Dio at the stairway about the medicine he's giving to his father, and when Jonathan thinks he has Dio cornered, he still second guesses himself because he hasn't truly accepted the call to adventure. Though once he's tricked Dio into actually revealing his plan to poison his father, Jonathan fully accepts the call to adventure. This is only solidified by him heading to Ogre Street, one of the most dangerous parts of London. In fact, the whole lead up to Ogre Street and return to his mansion is a microcosm of the hero's journey, though we have only begun the grand scale journey that is Phantom Blood as Jonathan returns to his home and enters the next stage of the journey. This return home is the beginning of the first threshold, where the hero begins his transformation. This stage in the journey is when the hero must experience a hardship or a trial that begins to truly transform him into the hero that he will later become. In the case of Jonathan, this is when he chooses to stay and fight a fully vampiric powered up Dio in his burning mansion. This is because Jonathan is still that young man that never backs down, even when he faces insurmountable odds. Though, instead of like last time with the bullies, Jonathan actually overcomes this threshold completely. This is to show that he has grown not only as a fighter, but also as a person, as he is able to defeat and seriously injure the much more powerful Dio. And as he does this, Jonathan permanently steps out of the regular ordinary world and into the special world, as described by Joseph Campbell, which also completes the first act of both the hero's journey and of Phantom Blood. Next you have the second act, which begins with the hero testing his allies. This is where Speedwagon and Arena return to the story to aid Jonathan after his fight with Dio. But this part is greatly overshadowed by the much more important next step, meeting the mentor. The mentor in a hero's journey is someone who will give the hero advice or magical abilities to truly overcome any obstacle in his journey. This mentor is Williams Appelli, and the magical ability or the advice he gives to Jonathan is Hamon, of course. As William teaches Jonathan the ways of Sendo and how to use Hamon, he is also specifically modeled after other mentor figures from media Araki enjoyed at the time, such as the Karate Kid or Jackie Chan's Drunken Master. He was also given a specific design to imply age and experience while also being able to keep up and outperform Jonathan physically. Then to truly move on from the mentor stage of the journey to the next stage, Jonathan must test the abilities he learned from the mentor, and this is shown twice from the manga actually, as he completely overpowers Wang Shen with the strength he gained through his training, and then he overcomes Jack the Ripper with the wit he learned from the mentor, where in the anime he only ever encounters Jack the Ripper. Though after mastering Hamon and ending the Mentor arc, Jonathan reaches the second threshold, the second encounter with danger, often referred to as completely entering the abyss. This part of Phantom Blood is during the Bruford and Tarkus fight. Now, this stage of the journey is often referred to as the death and rebirth of the hero. This is shown twice during this arc of Phantom Blood, as Jonathan cleanses the dead knight, Bruford, giving the legendary knight a rebirth. And then you have Jonathan's fight with Tarkus. During this fight, Tarkus yanks Jonathan into the ceiling with such force that it actually breaks Jonathan's neck. He also severs his mentor in half with the chain. This is a metaphorical death of the man that Jonathan was, as in this moment, no amount of training could have helped him. Only through Zeppeli's sacrifice is Jonathan reborn a new man. Jonathan then completely overcomes the second threshold and leaves changed forever. From here we enter the third act of the hero's journey. Jonathan is completely transformed and has to deal with loss, or deal with atonement for his loss, which he does by honoring Zeppeli and approaches the final threshold. Though before we completely reach the third threshold, we do meet 3 new allies, which I should mention that it is perfectly fine to introduce new allies at any of the 3 first stages of a hero's journey. It is highly recommended to introduce them early on, but it's fine to introduce them now. We get introduced to Dyer, Straits, and Tom Petty, though Tom Petty was introduced early on as the mentor of the mentor for Jonathan. They were most likely introduced now to show what type of level Jonathan is on in the grand scheme of Hamon mastery, but also probably because this is the third stage, as the third stage is one of the fastest stages, and without anything else, the hero would move instantly to the third threshold. Speaking of the third threshold is the final encounter with the big bad, the Hydra, the dragon, or in this case, Dio. Jonathan must take all of the skills that he has amassed over his journey and overcome the main villain. Then, after the third threshold is complete, the hero then returns to the ordinary world that he had left to go on this journey. In defeating Dio, Jonathan is able to return home and try to live a normal life. This stage is often referred to as returning with the elixir. Now, this is a common misconception. The elixir isn't actually a physical object the hero must return with. It is actually just the idea of what the hero was going on the journey for. In Jonathan defeating Dio and cleansing the world of his sin, Jonathan is returning to the ordinary world with the elixir of Dio's defeat, which then begins the fourth stage of the hero's journey. This stage is the hero returns to the ordinary world a changed man. Now, because the hero's journey is a cycle and therefore truly doesn't have an ending, this means that the hero may actually be tempted into doing another adventure, as he may be bored with the life he returns to, or the final encounter with the villain may actually come back to haunt the hero. This is shown when Jonathan finds Dio has returned to the ordinary world as well, leading them to the fourth threshold. This threshold allows the hero to either retire or continue down the road of another adventure. Jonathan is actually forced into his decision by the character that he is. The noble gentleman will return to the adventure to save not only Irina, his wife, but also some child he doesn't even know. And by choosing to fight Dio again, he chooses to continue his journey. And since he dies during the beginning of the new journey, someone must take up his journey. And this fits perfectly into the direct connection between Stardust Crusaders and Phantom Blood, which I remind you, Araki had the ideas for Stardust Crusaders before he even started writing Phantom Blood. He just didn't have things like stands in mind. He had the basic concept for Stardust Crusaders, and he created Phantom Blood as a lineage for Stardust Crusaders to be built off of. Now, I think Araki's use of the hero's journey for Jonathan is done perfectly. It builds up Jonathan as the legend he needed to be. He actually comes off as something like the Greek legend of Heracles. Though interestingly enough, Jonathan isn't the only character to go through a hero's journey in Phantom Blood. Dio also goes through a hero's journey-esque adventure in the exact same way as Jonathan, and this was planned by Araki. And if we start to view things from Dio's perspective, we start to notice that Dio did have a call to adventure. His goal was to amass great power. Originally, he planned to be the sole inheritor of the Joestar Will, but after Jonathan beat him soundly, his ego was completely challenged. He refused the call, but then returned to the call later when he began to poison George, as he still desired this power, even if it meant splitting it with Jonathan, the man who shattered his ego. Though, when he enters the first threshold, which is when Jonathan confronts him, his plan to overcome this first threshold is to find a way to murder Jonathan. He successfully does complete this threshold as he plans to use the stone stone mask that Jonathan is researching to end Jonathan's life. This research of the stone mask is where he meets his mentor. The mentor in this journey is the mask itself, as the mask imparts experience onto Dio, allowing him to gain new abilities. He becomes a vampire. This is when he moves to his second threshold when Jonathan encounters him in the mansion. Dio literally is reborn a new being. He is no longer human. He rejects his humanity. He becomes something more. Then we move on to Dio's third threshold, which is the same third threshold as Jonathan, which he is overcome, yet he survives, and in surviving follows Jonathan back to the ordinary world. Changed for the worse, but accepting Jonathan is on his level. And then, finally, like Jonathan, he willingly chooses to continue the cycle of the adventure, taking Jonathan's body and using it to amass the power that he's always looking for. This is because, as Araki stated in his book Manga Theory and Practices, that Jonathan and Dio are light and dark. They are reflections of each other. This is also true in their journeys. Dio's mentor is directly related yet still remaining completely opposite to Jonathan's. Both Dio and Jonathan are resurrected at the cost of someone's life, but Dio takes the life where Jonathan is given the life, and they also both return to the ordinary world after their climactic final battle. And lastly, they both choose to continue the journey. Dio chooses to attack Jonathan and claim his body, where Jonathan unwantingly continues the journey as he combats the evil that is Dio. They are closely intertwined and neither of them find true peace until both of them are completely disintegrated. So Phantom Blood was created directly in the image of Greek legends, giving it its own mythological feel, as Araki wanted to create legends for his future characters to be molded from. And I feel that this makes Phantom Blood and Jonathan Joestar that much more important to the whole of JoJo. And if you want to check out more Jonathan themed videos, I recommend you check out The Cost of Nobility, I believe it's called, by Caleb IA. He made a really good video about Jonathan. I'm thinking of making a Beauty of Jonathan in the future, because I really like Jonathan as a character, but I covered a lot of what I was going to talk about here, so I don't know. If you guys still want that, I'll still do that. But if you also enjoyed this video and want to help support more videos like it, I have a Patreon at patreon.com/ManyNotTheBadGuy. And if you want to experience your own hero's journey, but with like a lot more dick jokes and terrorism, you can go over to funimation.com/show/Shimonetta, a boring world where the concept of dirty jokes doesn't exist, and buy yourself a copy. Or head on over to Amazon.com and buy yourself a copy there. I don't care where you buy it, just buy the DVD. Buy the Blu-ray. Buy both. Actually, yeah, buy both.